Hi everybody, I'm David with Bolivar Live and welcome to another Bolivar Live Did You Know. Once again, we're here at the Bolivar Lighthouse with Mr. Loyd Maxwell. And you know, Texas has a lot of history. I always say the lighthouse is an icon of beauty. But if you're coming to Bolivar Peninsula, you might get caught in a cattle drive. And that's what we're going to talk about today, how his dad and grandpa drove cattle from Devers down to the beach and let the cattle enjoy the beach over the winter. Mr. Maxwell, or Loyd, you tell me to call you. I can't believe how far they came. Give us a rundown on where you left out of, where you spent your nights, and then how long they were down here and how many head, because you said that the cattle drive could be 2.5 miles long.
That's right. My grandfather had a big ranch about 16 miles south of Devers, and they called it Cottonwood. Some people used to call it the King's Ranch of East Texas back then. That was just kind of joking, you know, but it was a heck of an operation. He had probably 70,000 acres of land at that time. And he would bring, in the wintertime, about 5,000 head of cattle down here. And they would start to drive there at Cottonwood, south of Devers.
How far is that from, north of Winnie?
Well, it's about 16 miles, something like that. So the first day, and he had a crew of about 15 or 20 men when they were driving. But they would take the cattle from Cottonwood. Of course, there were not a lot of fences back then, so they were able to drive straight through. But they would go the first day to Stowell, and they'd go to Jamie White's ranch, and they would overnight the herd there at White's Ranch.
White's Ranch.
Right, the first night. And then they would drive on, and the first drives were before the Intercoastal Canal was built. So they didn't have to cross the canal at that time. So they went ahead from White's Ranch and to make it to the beach between High Island and Gilchrist the second day.
Okay.
So they'd had plenty of cattle out there, and plenty of room for the cattle to graze and rest during the night. Then the third day, they would drive the cattle from Gilchrist or that area across through Rollover Pass down to Mom and Daddy used to call it Flake. It's a little community about 2.5 miles on the west side of the Rollover Pass.
Sort of Kaplan area.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And that was Grandpa's start of his pastures pretty well. And he pretty well ran cattle all the way from Flake all the way to the point.
Down here?
Yes. And there were still native cattle down here, of course. Mm-hmm. But he kept his cattle down here, and then they would haul hay down here in the wintertime as they needed it from up country. Back then, there weren't any improved pastures I'm talking about in the late 20s, early 30s. There was no such thing as improved pastures. That's why they came down here, because there was a lot of overwinter grass. They would burn the marshes off and the new green grass would come up, so the cows had good grazing out here. So that was the purpose of bringing them down here, to have winter grazing.
Winter grazing. And then when they drove them back, they just went back the same area. Would they separate them or anything down here?
No, the biggest problems they had is a lot of times if they had some heavy cows that had calves for them down here, a lot of times they would separate. We call them the wet cows. Mm-hmm. And the wet cows and the calves, a lot of times, if they had real young calves, and they tried not to have too many wet cows during the wintertime down here, but they'd haul them by truck. So the cows and the calves wouldn't get separated.
Right.
But the main herd was driven.
Now, once they cut the intercoastal through, they'd swim them across the intercoastal?
No, they drove them across the
bridge?
The old swing bridge.
The old swing bridge.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
I just saw a picture yesterday. I think Greg Fountain or someone had posted of the old swing bridge, and they were talking about, can you remember coming down to the beach, having to sit for an hour and a half in a hot car with no air conditioning, and waiting for the swing bridge to come back around?
Well, my grandpa hired a guy named Luther Owens from Beaumont. Mm-hmm. And Luther had an old 16mm camera of Grandpa's, and he used to get up, or he went up in the operator's deck in the bridge, and he took pictures of the cattle drives
coming down.
And we had those pictures for years, and we used to show them, but they were put in the attic of my grandmother Boyd's house over at Finette, and we never knew what happened to them. So they were left up there until Dr. Sharon bought the old house back about 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and he found those old films up in the attic. And unfortunately, the weather and the heat had ruined the things, and we sent them to California to try to have them restored. They should have been in the Cowboy Hall of Fame because of the size of of the herds and everything. But unfortunately, they couldn't be saved. But we got the chance to watch a lot of that stuff. So Grandpa had Luther Owens taking pictures of a lot of his operations, and I don't envy him because he spent a lot of time out there on that ranch taking pictures.
Taking pictures. And you know, today they still drive cattle. Some of the ranchers there between Highland and Winnie, a lot of times you can be coming down, and usually it's in the early morning. But if you get lucky, you'll get caught behind or in front of a cattle drive, and it's really neat to see true Texas work, true ranch work being done as they transfer cattle from pasture to pasture, or take them to a sorting area where they can ship them out. And so you can still see some of that down here between Winnie and High Island certain times of the year, or when they're changing pastures. Well, Mr. Maxwell, thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome.
These shows have been great, and we're not over yet. So y'all stay tuned. Until next time, I'm David with Bolivar Live. Y'all have a great day, great week. Come see us. God bless, and bye-bye.